Hi, my name is Jessica Ship, and this is my presentation over cultural diversity and Benedictine monasticism. Most of the time, people understand culture as something that we come from, something that we're surrounded by, and what we grow up with. Usually it's comprised as a typical group, our family, our church, things like that. Most of the time, it's considered of where we came from. It helps define our identity, and it helps determines who we are. For a few, though, there is a strong pull towards something very different. Sometimes a way of life beckons those to adopt a new kind of existence. The St. Meinrad Archabbey is a way of life that calls to people, and it invokes them into a unique culture all its own. St. Benedict was born in 480, and he passed away in the year 543. He exiled himself to a place called Monte Cassino, where he wrote his book called The Rule. In it, he scribed for monks that came to follow him a way of life that surrounded around prayer and work. And doing those two things brought the monk closer to God and closer to themselves. However, the rule itself was very, very strict. It had very strict guidelines and very strict rules that the monks were to follow. So this brings us to current day St. Meinrad, Indiana. The monks that live within the cloistered walls of St. Meinrad atop the hill of St. Meinrad, Indiana, have adopted this rule of St. Benedict as their own lifestyle. And it's become a culture unto themselves. And it's very different and very unique from any other culture that most people are accustomed to. And I found that very interesting. I think that it's very interesting that most of us consider culture something that we come from, but very few of us consider that for some people there is a call to a different culture and a call to a different life. And it can still be very diverse and is very diverse from anything that most of us are accustomed to. And I think that that's very interesting, and I think that it's very unique, and I also think that it's a great opportunity for those of us who don't know that much about it to become more educated and understand something that can be a little unsettling. So, the monastery, as I said before, sits on top of a hill in St. Meinrad, Indiana. The town sits below, and it is a cloistered community. That means that it is secluded from the outside world, and in many ways it is. Many of the luxuries that you or I commonly take for granted are not permitted in this way of life. Each monk has his own cell, also known as the room, and in that room it is furnished very humbly. A twin-size bed, a desk, and a chair for reading, reflecting, things like that. Televisions are not allowed in the rooms. You can find a television in the community rooms. There are a couple of those throughout the house where people can gather and commune, for lack of a better word. So they can get together and visit there. Obviously, each person comes with their own wardrobe, but when they are admitted into the monastery, they are assigned a habit, and that habit is what they wear to church every day, 5 times a day, actually, and it's also worn in community gatherings like meals, meetings, things like that. One of the hallmark themes of Benedictine ways of life is a term called ora and labora, which translates to pray and work. And this is pretty much the conglomeration of their lives. They go to prayer 5 times a day in the monastery church. The first prayer in the morning is Vigils and Lauds. It begins at 5:30. Mass, daily Mass is usually from at 7:30 in the morning, except on Sundays it's at 9 a.m. and it's open to the public. At noon, the monks gather again for prayer, and after that they go to lunch where they dine together. Vespers is prayed at 5 p.m. and Compline, their night prayer, is prayed at 7. All of these are done within the monastery church. And each prayer, everyone knows that it's time to come to prayer because 10 minutes before the prayer is supposed to start, they toll the bells. So there is literally a call to prayer 5 times a day. Each particular prayer has certain prayers that are associated with it, and it's a very complex arrangement that can be very overwhelming, especially to a newcomer into that way of life. I think as time goes on, it becomes a little bit easier to understand what comes with each prayer, but to try to wrap your head around it in the beginning is very intimidating. When someone finds themselves being called to monastic life, the rule is set forth in a series of steps that need to be followed. Whenever the person comes to the monastery, they're first considered a candidate. The candidacy is for about 3 months, and while that person is, during that time, they try to decide whether or not this is the life that they actually want, whether this is the decision that they've made to come, is that really something for them. They attend prayers with the other monks, and they are assigned a duty or a task to kind of acclimate them to monastic life. If they choose to continue on, then they become what is called a novice. The novitiate lasts for 1 year and 1 day. During that time, they study the rule of St. Benedict, the history of St. Benedict, excuse me, human development, things like that. And they also are assigned to more housework jobs to it's more of the boot camp of monastery life. So it helps them to decide it helps them to discern, is this life for me? Is it not? Is this something that I want to do? Is this the call that I want to be answering? So after that time, if the novice would like to continue on this journey, they are offered the opportunity to make temporary vows. The temporary vows is also known as the juniorate, and that time lasts 3 years. During that time, studies are intensified, and more of the real life aspect of monasticism comes into play. And this is a very good time for the person to decide, there's more responsibility associated with the juniorate. It's just more of an intense level of of the monasticism. So after 3 years, if the person has still decided that this is the life that I want, this is the culture that I want to adopt, this is the life for me, then they take their final profession and their final vows, and they are officially a monk of St. Benedict. And if their schooling is finished, then they are assigned a job within the monastery or for the monastery, and they continue their life within the cloistered community of the St. Benedictine monastery at the St. Bernard Arch-Abbey. So it's a very intense time for people to decide if this life is for them or not, and for some it's not, and for some it is, and I feel like that's pretty amazing, to leave something that most of us consider to be very normal and to join a culture that in some ways is still very Renaissance. So the superior of the monastery is called the abbot. It is translated from the Greek word abba, which means father. His role is literally to oversee everything in the monastery. He is responsible for the spiritual and the physical and the general well-being of all of the monks within the monastery. It is a very serious role. He is elected. It is a chosen position by the other monks within the monastery, and there is no set term limit. Other monasteries, the term limit could be 8 years, and if re-elected, then the person can continue on. Whereas in this particular Arch-Abbey, the abbot is elected usually because the previous one has expired. The prior is selected by the abbot, and he is the next person in command of the monastery. He is usually the point of contact within the community, and he does things like assign jobs and liturgical assignments to the other monks, and he's the one that's in charge of making sure that the house kind of runs smoothly. And this becomes the monk's life, day in and day out, ora and labora, prayer and work, and they use this time in community to draw themselves closer to God and closer to the peace and the call that they feel God has for them. And it's something that is very inspiring if you see them in action. It's pretty amazing. Their life is dedicated to prayer and toil, and they leave the world that they knew to join a new culture and adopt a new life and a new identity, and they exchange something that is very pleasurable and easy for a life that is simple and full of solitude and prayer and simplicity, and I think that that's pretty neat. I have had the opportunity to ask a few of them, what is it that brought you here? Why did you decide that this is what you wanted? And most of them, their response is they wanted more from their life. They wanted to feel like their life was more fulfilling. They wanted to have a deeper community with others who were searching out the same things, and they wanted to have a deeper community with God. And when I ask them if, do they feel like they've found that here within the monastery, their answer is always yes. They say that they didn't like the life that they led before, and this particular culture and this particular life appeals to them in a way that is more fulfilling than they ever knew before. It is also more diverse than they've ever known before either. And they have grown to love the life that they lead now. They look at the men that they live with day in and day out as their brothers and as their family, and they love them like family. And I think that it's pretty amazing that they've given up everything that they've known before to come to the monastery to start a brand new life and a brand new culture, and they've embraced it, and they've grown with it, and together they have managed to become a culture that remains balanced and harmonious and peaceful. And I feel like that in and of itself is an amazing testament to how Benedictine monasticism is a diverse culture that thrives. Thank you very much.